Hi, I'm J. Lenora Bressler, and welcome to the May 11th, 2017 edition of The Bible, Delight in the Details. You know, sometimes I think that when we look at passages that we learned about initially when we were children, we sometimes skip over them. We say, oh, I know this, I've known this my whole life, there's nothing I can learn here. But it's usually those childhood remembrances that were remembered kind of in a general form. You know, we got the gist. A lot of times some of the details were overlooked. And now when we go back as adults, as we go back as adults, we see things in a different light, and we see it for the interesting little nuances that are there. That is especially true of a passage I want to look at today, which is in Luke 19, verses 1 through 10, the story of wee little Zaccheus. Remember him who climbed the tree to see Jesus. There's some interesting details in this story. First of all, Zaccheus, we're told, was the head tax collector in Jericho. Now, a couple interesting things here. Jericho is a very well-known city as in biblical history, but it's a very famous period. In fact, many archaeologists think that it is the oldest city in the world. That and possibly Damascus. So it goes back a very, very long time. And during the time of Christ, it was a very prominent city. It was known as the City of Palms, and it was the gateway that most pilgrims coming to worship in Jerusalem went up toward Jerusalem, toward Mount Zion, through Jericho. In fact, many scholars believe that the Palm Sunday, with all the palms that were being laid in the wake of Jesus as he entered Jerusalem, where did all those palms come from? Many think that it was cut down by pilgrims as they were coming through Jericho and then went on. They were carrying them and waving them as a sign of unity, national unity. Now, we're told that Zaccheus was the head tax collector. You know, this was a hated role. And the fact that he was the head of the tax collectors probably meant he was hated more than anybody else. The idea of the tax collectors in that day was that in the Israelites' minds, the occupying force over their country at that time was the Roman Empire. The Romans had a tax system. They would set the taxes, and then they would have people hired as independent contractors from the subjugated country's own people would act as the tax collectors. The way they would get paid is they would add a surcharge on to the taxes. So that's why there was such an opportunity for injustice, because people could add on, these tax collectors, if they wanted, could add on a huge amount that would go into their own pockets. And there was really no policing of this, because the Romans didn't care as long as they were getting their money. They didn't care how much the people were fleeced, and they would say, well, it's your own people doing it to you, so, you know, don't be mad at us. People really hated these tax collectors, not because there's so many of them were corrupt, but also because they felt like that these people were traitors to their own people. They were in cahoots with this occupying force that was subjugating them as a nation, and so they didn't have any respect for them, and really treated them very badly, actually. But Zaccheus, we're told, wanted to see Jesus. And it's interesting what he did. He went and climbed, we're told, a sycamore fig tree. Now, this is very meaningful because sycamores in North America are nothing like sycamores over in the Middle East. A sycamore tree over there is oftentimes very low to the ground. It has multiple limbs. It makes itself very easy for climbing and very easy for sitting on. And because of that, and because there were so many sycamore fig trees, particularly many of them were planted near roadways, it became very common that rabbis would stop at a sycamore tree and teach there. It was called teaching under the sycamore, because those long, low branches made a wonderful seating arrangement for an audience. So it's interesting that Zaccheus went to the place that he thought was most likely that Christ, passing through Jericho, would stop and teach. And this should be a statement to us. You know, when we want to hear from God, when we want to know Jesus, we want to see Jesus, we need to put ourselves physically where he is likely to be, and where he is likely to be talked about, and where he is likely to be taught about. So for those of us that think that maybe, you can do this without, you can do this Christian life thing without being in a church, without having a church family, without attending services, the truth is you need to go where God is being talked about and taught. And that's what Zaccheus did. And what happened? He put himself in the appropriate place, and Jesus showed up. And then Jesus had an encounter with him. Now, one last thing, a detail, is that we know that people were not happy about Jesus wanting to have dinner with Zaccheus. In fact, they said, "Why are you going to eat with a sinner?" But what we don't oftentimes remember is the Bible is very clear in Luke that Zaccheus said he was going to give half of his wealth to the poor, and then said, "If I have cheated anybody, I will make good 4 times that." And Christ said, today he has become a part of the family of Abraham. It wasn't about his lineage. It was about his faith and his behavior based on that faith and based on that understanding of God. That's how we come into the family of God. We cannot rely on what our parents did, or, Dad was a Sunday school teacher for 50 years and Mom was in the choir. And, we can't rely on our spouse's spiritual development or our children's or anybody else's. We rise or fall based on our own faith, our own action, and our own decision about whether or not to seek Christ. Let us seek him while he may be found, and let us go to seek him in places where he is likely to be found, just like Zaccheus. I'm J. Lenore Bressler. Visit me tomorrow on the next edition of the Bible. Delight in the details. Have a great day.